everybody. Can we hear me all right? Cool. So we've been on a 602-day break, but it's very exciting to welcome everybody back to the third annual osquery at scale. We had a couple of folks approach me about a keynote speaker. Harry, what are we going to do for a keynote speaker? To which I said, we have a keynote speaker at home, and my name's Harry Hayward. I do marketing at Uptycs, and I'm your keynote speaker at home. You are probably wondering, how can a marketer possibly, keynote a conference where the subject matter is highly technical in nature? And I just want everybody to know that in 5 minutes, maybe 10, I can bust open Terminal, pop into osquery-i, and tell you the date and time pretty easily. We're the organizers for the event. We have a whole bunch of people that we want to thank for this. That includes Ganesh Pai and Uma Reddy, all the personnel that are working the event, Allegra Events for helping us put this on, as well as the Exploratorium. This is a really fantastic venue. We're super excited to have this event take place here. There's a ton of neat things crammed into every corner of the venue that speak very nicely to the ethos of osquery and security and the curiosity that comes with both. So we're pumped to be here. A few housekeeping items. There are some name tags everyone's got. If you have any questions, find somebody with their name in black. That's going to be people that are sort of working the event. General attendees will be in green, and speakers will be in blue. If you're looking for the Wi-Fi, it's available. There's posted in a few different areas, but the network is osquery at scale, very secure. Bathrooms going to be down at the end of the hall. Our biggest complaint all time over a couple of osquery at scale is there's not enough bathrooms. Still the same number of bathrooms, but we made this a more intimate event so we can make sure there's plenty of resources there. Coffee and food available, free-flowing. There'll be meals served, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast will be at 9:30, lunch around 12:30, and then our dinner will be at around 6. And this is the part I've been looking forward to most. If everyone wants to take a second to reach underneath their seats, you're not going to find anything because all the magic actually happens up here through our speakers. And the folks that I want to thank specifically, I want to read off their names, and that's going to be Andrew Meese, Ryan Mack, Christopher Stanley, Anadi Sharma, Raja Jasper, Uma Uni, Zach Wasserman, Steve Shedlock, Uma Reddy, Ben Pruce, Nabil Shear, and Sarab Wadwa. Cannot thank you guys enough for participating. Extremely grateful to have you here. This all happens because of the speakers. People come back year over year to hear your story, and we're just super excited to have you back for our third year. Now, we'll have a couple of presentations today. Our networking event is this evening. There'll be another sort of networking event mid-afternoon for folks to connect with speakers and some of your other peers. Tomorrow we'll be resuming at 9:30 with breakfast, and that will be a day packed with more presentations. So I'm going to quickly introduce Ganesh for some opening remarks. Ganesh Pai, everybody.
Harry, thank you. First and foremost, majority of you probably may know the history of osquery dating back probably to 2014 and probably 2015, thanks to generosity of the Facebook engineering team and a bunch of people who open sourced. Now, while we were fortunate that we have taken on the mantle of osquery and scale and had the good fortune of building a community around it, what has resulted in the ensuing years, in some small part to us playing a role, but more importantly, you, the community, doing so, is it's lived up to its reputation of being deployed at scale. It evolved as a question and answer tool for a wide variety of hunting and investigation, but the biggest evolution that we probably have seen, having a front row seat both in terms of engineering and participating with the community, is that It's been playing an instrumental part in reducing risk in many large organizations. Today, I stand here due to the good fortune of ourselves being a venture which is capitalized on this open source instrumentation, but its telemetry has been instrumental in securing many orgs. And in line with some of the ethos of osquery and what we as an organization believe in it, we've had the good fortune, as Harry said, this is the third incarnation. Last year due to COVID and all, we had delays, but we still managed to put together a virtual conference. The expectation is that this will evolve and it'll get to be something far more significant. There are two essential parts to this. One, as Harry said, we are grateful and we can't thank the speakers enough. Because the first part of what we believe this conference stands for is operators who are willing to share their real-world expertise and share their approach and findings with others so that others can capitalize on some of the ideas and how they've gotten the necessary visibility. That's one. Second, without you, the participants, this would be a challenge because this wouldn't be a conference if not for users who are interested in what the speakers have to say. Without further ado, I know we've got a good set of speakers aligned. One of the things that you might be wondering what risk reduction is about, we've had great fortune in participating with customers and others outside to the extent of scoping risk as vulnerabilities as well as threats. And you'll see that the speakers today are probably giving you multiple angles and perspectives in terms of how you could get visibility into these two aspects and overall reduce your risk. I'm hoping that you'll enjoy the conference, but one of the things that I want to say before I wrap up out here is this conference, while we are fortunate that as a venture we can get a space like this, is in no small part to hard work of many of the Uptycs marketing team members, but notably Harry Hayward out here, who's been instrumental in pulling this together, Charlene Nee, who's been responsible for ensuring that we can pull an event off at this scale. And I'd like to thank our CMO, who recently came on board, Elias Sturman, who's been very instrumental in making this happen. So thank you guys for being here. Hope you enjoy all the presentations. And of course, consider this also as an opportunity to network with your peers. We are more than happy to share our experience in terms of what we've seen as a venture, but I'll pause here and let's get the show started. Thank you, everyone.
Alrighty, let's see. We're going to welcome up our first speaker today. That's Steve Shedlock. Steve comes to us from SEIC. He's got nearly 20 years working in IT and security. He's come a long way to join us from, I believe, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Philly. So we're very, very lucky to have him. Steve, you want to come up here and give yourself a more proper introduction? Yeah. Cool. You can flip through. This should work.
Is it gonna work on both?
Yeah.
All right. So just press forward. Right?
Yeah. Sorry. Click through here.
Okay. Cool.
There you go.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. My name is Steve Shedlock, and I'm the team leader of incident response at SEI. I've been there 22 years, and I've spent about half my career as a developer and half my career in InfoSec. So I wanted to give you a typical scenario that many of us have been through in our career. You waken in the middle of the night to the sound of your phone. You see there's a text message from your overnight crew or on-call person alerting you to the fact that there's chatter on social media to a new variant of ransomware that is infecting companies. IOCs and a few samples of ransomware are being passed via intel communities that you follow. You get ready as quick as you can and you head into work. As you're listening to the radio, the news outlets are already reporting companies have been compromised and are calling this new threat Cookie Monster ransomware. You get to your desk and you already have 8 voicemails asking if you can block this threat from occurring or if you can even detect it. You need to get a response together, but do you even have the ability or the metrics to be able to determine this information yourself? Are the controls that you have in place right now effective versus this new threat? What do you do? The issue I'll be covering in this presentation is the fact that we spend billions of dollars on security programs across our organizations to protect us from threats and to keep our companies digitally safe, but there's very little accounting in where the benefit lies and if we are doing things the right way. How do we know if our cybersecurity program is successful? How do we know we're getting an acceptable or a great return on our investment? How can we be more effective and agile in what we do daily? This is my company's journey on how we were able to answer that question. It's made us more effective as an incident response team, and we were able to quantify the work we do in a more visible way. Cyber threat actors gather information to weigh the incentives and disincentives, quantify risk and rewards, and then make decisions or take actions based on those inputs. Threat actors operate on an objective scoreboard. For each type, that scoreboard is measured in available capital and time versus goals. This is very similar to how companies assess if they want to invest in a new product area or enter a new business. What are the benefits versus the costs? The benefits and costs may be different for threat actors, but the method works in a very similar way. For crimeware groups and ransomware gangs, the goal is making money off a ransom. For Anonymous and WikiLeaks, the goal is disruption and attention. For nation-state actors, the goal is information warfare and espionage. The disincentives would be similar for each of the threat actors. They would be incarceration and discovery. Not only that, but this is exactly what we do when we're protecting our environments from threat actors. If we can't fully eliminate a risk, we want to make it as expensive as possible in time and resources for a threat actor to profit off our company. The major goal is to get them to stop trying or to move on to an easier victim. Are you able to do that same type of analysis on your cybersecurity operations program? Can we determine in our own environments what is working versus not working and redirect our resources accordingly? Do you have what you need to quantify your security operations risk? How do you go about determining where you are at the risk or if the controls you have in place at the moment are even effective? Are you able to use that information to communicate upwards or across your organization for investment or operational risk? Can you quantify the value and security that you're providing to your organization? Or were you like us several years ago wondering, how do I even begin to quantify the value or the protection that I bring to my company? This leads us to the concept of threat modeling, which can be broken down into 3 different sections. One is knowing what threats we faced in the past, are facing now, and are likely to face in the future. 2 is knowing what controls we have in our environment to deal with those threats. And 3 is knowing how those controls have worked, are working, and are expected to work against the threats we are aware of. This seems easy to break down, but how do you get there? To get there, let's take a step back to the age-old saying, prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. I would love to protect any malicious act from happening in my environment, but that's impossible. So for what I can't prevent, I better be able to detect it so I can mitigate that threat to the best of my ability. To accomplish this, I need full visibility into what I have and what my gaps are. Full visibility is paramount, and it's key in being able to assess steps 1 and 2 from the previous slide. We need as much data from our own infrastructure to determine what we can see and what we are blind to, and try to resolve that as best as possible. For example, to know what outside traffic is hitting our web servers, we need visibility into the firewall logs, any network connection logs, and the response from the web server. In this example, if we have full visibility, we get a good idea on when a request comes into our network and hits our web server, exactly what happened. Also, we can determine if that traffic is fitting a normal business pattern and is benign, or malicious actors trying to probe our network or web server for a vulnerability. Since grabbing all of this data and keeping it forever is not possible, having a clear data lifecycle is important. Data is retained at different levels for differing amounts of time and money based on utility. For example, I want to keep my login info for 90 days so I can track back user activity if needed, for example, for an investigation or insider threat ability. But PCAP data may only be kept for 4 days because the cost of the storage there would be significant. I would love to keep PCAP day for 90 days, but the cost would be astronomical to do so, and the utility may not be there anyway. From there, we can use threat intelligence from the industry and other peers to determine what threats we are likely to face in the future. Example would be ransomware, O365 phishing, or credential theft. Grabbing intel that you derive and get from other sources is on how different threats work, and then determine what controls would be needed to stop them. This also includes threat intel you can produce on your own. We spend a lot of time in our organization seeing intel people share with us, trying to pivot off that intel and share anything additional we might find. Leverage your own internal intel as well as if you can, because nobody knows your network better than you. So if you're in a certain industry, reach out and see if there are other people in that industry sharing security info. It's a big help. Now we get into step 2, taking all the controls we have in place and determining what threats they will prevent. So for example, if someone's looking for all of the remote desktop machines that are open in my network, and my firewall prevents them from getting into my corporate environment to find them, the firewall is the control for that threat. So what are our controls? Where do they reside? What threats do they prevent? And where is our coverage missing? And how can we go and track this in an easy, visible, and reportable way, not only for our team to know what to work on, but for management to see where our coverage is? So I want to break down one piece of that visibility, and this is what was happening on our workstation and server endpoints. Back in 2019, I started looking into this problem, endpoint visibility for my company, because the activity we were seeing on our endpoints was not robust enough. Our EDR solution that we had at the time and currently have only held some data on artifacts for a very short time, such as DNS activity. If a user had a single browser session open, it would only be a few hours before that EDR solution wouldn't track that data anymore because it was a long-running process. So I was trying to find a way that I could harvest that data for ourselves and make it basically limitless to the activity that we could write detection rules for. This led me looking into Sysmon for all of our endpoints. I spent about 6 months looking at all the traffic on several machines and sending it to our SIM. There were some pros and cons to this. One of the pros is Sysmon is publicly available from Microsoft and it's free. That's always a big win. The activity that you were looking for is always entered into the event log for inspection, and the amount of visibility you can get from Sysmon was unlike anything I had seen up to that point. There's a ton of information you can detect on processes, drivers, network connections, etc. There were a few cons though, and they were big ones. You will have to do a lot of filtering in your log volume, and the utilization to keep the utilization on your endpoints manageable. As new applications are added, it'll be on an ongoing basis. So if you get a new application that people start installing and it's not in your filters, it will start ramping up your CPU process there. Filtering is not easy or intuitive with Sysmon. The syntax can make it challenging and easy to make mistakes with. How do you get all your logs off your systems in a reasonable way? So how do you get to that all to your SIM or to your central location? What happens if a user goes on vacation for a week and their event log fills up and it crashes their PC? That was a problem. Logistics of pushing an updated filter file to all endpoints. And then a huge one is you can't natively nest rules in Sysmon. So for example, if I wanted to look at all of the encrypted PowerShell across my entire network, I would have to pull all the PowerShell in with Sysmon. I couldn't sit there and go, show me, pull all the PowerShell in and then only show me the encrypted ones. It was kind of an all or nothing piece there. So I was going to have to filter at the SIM level, likely a lot of false positives or in the profile. So ultimately, we felt that project was too difficult to pursue, even though we saw a lot of value in it. And here's an example of what Sysmon can get you that I was interested in. In the image shown, I could see that regedit is making a DNS call to GitHub. That's something that I would want to drill into and I would want to be alerted into because that's abnormal activity that probably may be benign, but it's something I would want to look at too. If I was only looking at the DNS logs, I would only see the DNS request to GitHub. I wouldn't be able to tie it back to a process on a machine. And that was really important to me, to be able to take some of these requests and actually tie it back to a process running on the machine. So after a couple of years, we became aware of osquery and started to look into it about a year ago, and it was a big part of making the visibility we needed on endpoints a reality. Not only is it open source, but it runs on other operating systems other than Windows, and that was a big negative also, is I want to be able to run the same tool on Mac or Linux or other systems. We have a big Linux server footprint, so this was a huge benefit to us. A ton of data can be retrieved from an endpoint with osquery. Pretty much anything my team can think of can be retrieved, and a detection rule can be written. I am still trying to produce a good alert case for fan speed, but it's out there if I can figure out one. If you have one, please let me know, because I'm determined to write an alert for fan speed. Not only can we write new alerts that'll help us out here, but we can also, anything that we can pull from osquery also is more data and context around our other security tools. So if our EDR system fires an alert, it's more context around that we're able to leverage. Also, I can write SQL-based queries to get at the data, so I can nest commands in a query. So if I look at the example before, I can look for just encrypted PowerShell and really whittle down the amount of false positive alerts we would be getting. This is key with a smaller team that we have at SEI. We only have about 15 people on the InfoSec team at SEI. So the amount that we can whittle down the false alerts that we have to put eyes on, it's a big deal for us in keeping our team running. osquery can also be deployed at scale, either using open source tools that exist right now, or buying a solution from a provider. And the biggest deal for us in being able to use is to be able to use our repository of Yara roles, community shared and internally developed, that we've been successful using in our network and on attachments at SEI, and moving that into the endpoint space for finding malware and malicious activity with high indicators. So for example, IPs and DNS entries are low-level indicators because they can be changed quite easily, where coding techniques that malware writers use that we can focus on are much harder to change. It's easy for a malware actor to change an IP, change a DNS server. It's harder for them to change the packer that they use to compile their malware with, right? That's a much higher level code. And if you can key on that, you're gonna own them for a lot longer than you would with the other pieces. Let alone that the ability to actually look at processes that might be encrypted or in memory that may never land on the system, but be able to see them in memory and be able to write rules against it. We're relatively new in using osquery. We've only been running up for about 3 or 4 months now, but we're excited about the amount of insight it provides and what we as security professionals can do with this new data. Here's an example of an OS query command that will allow you to look through PowerShell events on an endpoint. So seeing the intersection is how operational risk can be quantified. Multiple ways to do that. And the way the SEI chose was a threat matrix and control validation, which controls would fire for a given event based on past, current, and expected future. And then we would look at our threat matrix and see what threats need coverage, and that would lead to new controls or the enhancing of controls, which leads us back into updating the threat matrix, and the whole series begins again. And I'll go over an example on how this works. Which phase of the attack controls fire for a given threat, which controls would fire if our threat or our peers' other threat intel observed were also to hit our infrastructure. So the whole key is seeing what would fire, ultimately lets us know what would not fire, and knowing what would fire and not fire lets us identify our gaps and begin the quantification. The arrow on the slide signifies different options that we could take if there's a lack of coverage on a threat that's in our threat matrix. This is how we quantify its risk, address gaps, and deploy resources accordingly. So for example, we're missing coverage for XYZ threat in these specific areas, but we don't have them in other areas. So for this threat, means we risk by not covering it. So we can do a few things with this. We can accept the risk. The risk is either very small or the damage is so minor it's not worth our resources to fix. We could gather more intel on the threat. This could lead to additional indicators for detection. For example, if we do more research into an actor, or we reach out beyond our usual intel communities for information. We could write a new control to create coverage. So we could come up with a new YAR rule or a method of detection that doesn't exist right now. For example, writing that new YAR rule on our IDS that will match on this new threat. We could contact the vendor to act accordingly. So we could push the vendor to patch the exploit or to remediate the threat. And lastly, we could invest in a new tool or service that may address a gap in our visibility. So for example, if we're not seeing something like, we're not seeing our email coming into our network well enough, we could buy a new product that would give us more information there. It's probably the last thing you want to do, but it would help. Over time, this process moves security from reactive to proactive, and it becomes clear where you have coverage and where you don't. All right, so the way SEI handles this is creating a threat matrix tied to each threat that we see in our environment. So we're going after threat families here. So anytime there's a new campaign, we tie our controls to each stage of the cyber kill chain so we can visually see at a glance what our coverage is for that particular threat. It's a scaled down version of the MITRE kill chain. This is what we call defense in depth. We can see clearly for a certain threat where we have coverage and where we don't. For example, let's say there's that ransomware variant called Cookie Monster that we're getting intel from. The malware is being delivered via targeted phishing. Usually this consists of IOCs, and we can likely get our hands on a sample. First thing we would do is look where our email security devices can see or detect this. They may be blocking or detecting on a number of indicators depending on the malware, such as sender, subject, message ID, attachment pattern, or a combination of a few of them. If we're getting a good detect from our email solution, we can check that off as a control, in this case in the delivery section. Note there are categories in the kill chain that this type of control won't ever see. This also helps us determine where our controls are effective and where they won't give us any visibility. We can run the malware if we can get a sample in a sandbox or a test VM with our controls and see which existing controls see it. Based on that, we will be able to see where those endpoint controllers are being effective and where they might have to have additional coverage. For example, if we run the malware with our EDR control on there, it might see it, block it, or detect it. If it doesn't block it, do we see the command and control traffic outbound with our network security controls? We see what happens and we update that. This saves us from our first run at will we see this threat be when the actual malware enters our system. When we do eventually see this malware in our system, we'll be confident in our ability to detect and stop it. At that point, we can integrate our alerts to feed back into our kill chain. What control generated an alert and when? What was the outcome of the alert? You can see how we break down our alerts in the right panel. Filtered. Event was not a threat at all, and there's no need to alert on it anymore. For example, maybe a vulnerability in Windows 7 when we're completely running Windows 10. Monitored. Event was a normal business traffic or not a threat. For example, a piece of load testing software our development team may use sets off a few alarms, but is not a threat. Compromised. The threat made it through our defenses and either completed this kill chain or made it to the far right side of it. More work needs to be done to stop it. Remediated. A control was not in place at the time of this alert, but a control was put in place to detect or remediate this. For example, we didn't see the malware, so we wrote a new rule in a control, whether it be email, endpoint, or network, to detect it. Broken kill chain. A control did its job and stopped this threat. If it had not been for this control, we would have had a compromised status. This can even be as simple as the fact that your user was educated enough to realize this was a phishing email and decided not to click it and report it to the security team. It's user education. So, for example, our Cookie Monster ransomware is detected at the email security layer, but it makes its way to the endpoint. Our network security layer also detected it, either by a rule or signature that the vendor implemented or we created on our own, and made its way to the endpoint. At the endpoint, the fake Word document that was attached tried to run PowerShell, and the endpoint security product blocked it. We would know that all our basic controls saw this, and that the endpoint security control actually blocked it, and this resulted in a broken kill chain. Since we track all this data in our tickets, the kill chain is updated on the delivery piece for the email security and network security automatically, and the endpoint security saw the exploitation piece and stopped it. This gives us an easily viewable and actionable data that we can use internally in my team to strengthen our defenses by knowing what is working and what is not working for a given threat, and generating metrics to display to upper management and other stakeholders about what the security we have in place is actually doing. We track our changes to the matrix, so I can use a time frame of 14 days, for example, and see what threats we've seen in our network during that period and where we've added controls. So we have the visibility and the data to answer these questions now. What threats are we seeing or not seeing? I can look at the threat matrix and determine this quickly because we are gathering that data. On what threats are the security team focused right now? I can look at the last 14 days of our threat matrix and see what threats have been active and what have had control work done on them. How is it determined if threats are likely to come this way? Are we seeing these threats? Or are we getting intel from our industry? If not, it's possible that the threat has gone dormant for some time. For example, Emotet went dormant for about 6 months before it came back, or it could be a specific threat is just gone. You know, they got arrested or they packed up shop and they're working on something else now. More research is needed on it, but it gives us a place to start. When one of these threats arrives, how is it known which controls fired, meaning they prevented or detected the threat? Where in the kill chain I could see our detections are effective and delivery through exfiltration. I want all of our controls to be as far to the left as possible and being able to see it in the detection phase. I would really prefer nothing ever get to the right side. In summary, being able to effectively answer these 3 points will allow you to, at a glance, determine what threats to your organization you have coverage for, where your controls are for these threats, and exactly how effective they are. And as a bonus, you'll have defensible metrics you can pass along to stakeholders and management on what you are seeing and preventing in the short and long term and where you're being effective in your security. The bottom line is this: adding quantification to your security process will make you a more effective and more transparent security team. I hope this presentation gives you some additional ideas to think about how we quantify our security processes and get you thinking about how we evaluate what good security is. Thank you. I think we can tell, I mean, I don't think we're not necessarily putting a risk score to it. I think what we're doing right now is just trying to see what we have in our environment or what may be coming and how we can block it. I mean, we have a ton of metrics that we can show through, that we show to management that will show us from every ticket that we track on where the threats were stopped, what of each malware family that we actually saw that might happen, and like, for example, how many compromises we had in a given quarter or a month. So we do have metrics on that. We absolutely could probably do some more digging and try to come up with some better trends and some predictive analysis there to probably help out. At this point, we haven't, but that's probably a good idea to kind of pursue that a little further.
Did I see another hand up in the back there? No? Okay. Just wait a minute. We got a question here. I'll come down to you with the mic.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're creating these threat metrics to provide the visibility to the execs about like what's the posture of your companies. What is the totality of these threats? What is the domain of threats do you use? Do you use the threats that you are seeing right now, or like what is the complete set of things that you care about?
So what we kind of limit ourselves to, and this isn't a small set, is all the threats that we're seeing intel on. So right now we're in a financial security group through FSISAC. So all of the banks, a lot of the banks are across the country and the world are sharing information there, as well as some higher level intel groups as well. So if we see chatter that's going on with something, then we'll add it to our threat matrix and say, okay, you know, not that this is new, but Emotet, for example, is new. People are sharing intel. We haven't seen it yet, but we've started to get samples. We've started to get indicators. We would start tracking that threat. And we're doing it from threat family. So if Emotet changes, it's still Emotet to us. But something along the lines like O365 phishing would just be a generic O365 phishing, no matter what the different actor might be on that. So what we're trying to do is it's geared to what we might be seeing. So for example, we're not tracking some actor that's going after industrial corporations, because we're not going to see any of that malware. But one of the nice things about being in threat sharing with other people in your industry is you're very rarely ever the first person to see it. So if I see someone like Wells Fargo will share info and say, hey, we saw this, I know that there's a chance it may hit me, it may not, but we'll be prepared for it, and we'll be ready for it when the time comes.
What does the automated feedback loop for your controls and detections look like?
Okay.
How are you automating the process of enriching your detections and actually knowing that your threat modeling is working?
So what we do is we created a custom SIM about 5 years ago, and anytime an event comes through, any event we look at, we will actually go through and the analyst will detail all this information. So if we see something like if a fish comes in, we'll come up with where it's detected. So for example, on something like if we get an alert on a fish and the email program picks it up, that's easy. We've got a detection there. Some of the stuff is a little harder, right? So it didn't make it to the endpoint, so we don't have any testing there. So what we'll normally have to do is get the malware sample, pull it out of the email sample, and actually use it in a sandbox and run it against our sandbox with those tools on it and see one at a time, okay, our EDR solution saw it, or it didn't, but we saw the network, the C2 traffic coming out, so we have a detection there. So we're doing a lot of that as well. We're doing a lot of testing with our tools to make sure, hey, when a new threat comes, we've got coverage all the way down the line on it, even if it's not making it that far in the chain. We want to make sure that, things happen, right? somebody's doing a network change and now all of a sudden they bypassed your email security and you didn't know it until a new phishing campaign comes in on Monday. So we do a lot of testing with our own tools to see if it's actually picking up what it's supposed to be picking up.
Love the questions. Anything else for Steve? On the way. Oh, got a couple more.
So you have a CI pipeline for your, I guess, controls to make sure, I guess, run them against tests or whatnot?
Yes, so we would, basically what we can do is we can update, we got two ways of updating our threat matrix. We can either do it automatically through the tickets when an analyst goes through and sets the certain parameters, it'll go back and automatically update it. But if we have analysts that are looking on a regular basis at the threat matrix, and they may go through and go, oh, okay, and I keep picking on Emotet, but sorry, but for Emotet, okay, we haven't seen anything on our EDR solution for a period of time. Let me just go make sure that the latest variant of Emotet is still being picked up by our EDR solution. And that's when they would go to a sandbox, run it against that sandbox and go, okay, yeah, it blocked it or it detected it or it didn't see it at all, which is a real problem. And if it didn't see it at all, then we have to either write a rule on our own to detect that after that point so that we're making sure we have a detection, or go beat up our EDR vendor and go, why are you not seeing this latest variant of Emotet?
But I guess there's no pipeline for prior controls.
You mean like a history or?
Like at Jenkins, I guess. Did you put the stuff through and say this still passes?
We have a revision history. So not anything formal like through Jenkins, but we do have like a revision history where it'll show when the controls were last updated and when, every time that threat matrix is updated for a particular category, we're getting a log there that we could go back and roll back and go, hey, yeah, 6 months ago we saw this and this control worked. Now all of a sudden it doesn't. What changed, right? Is there a bug in the software? Did some variant change? Whatever we were keying on, did that disappear, right? So we do have that. We probably should formalize something a little more formal like that. But we do have a revision history for that.
What would you say are the biggest challenges to using osquery as a tool to implement this kind of framework that you've described?
So I would say the biggest challenge is the automation. Is there's a lot of code work in the background to get things to update automatically, right? And we're lucky we have our own SIM that we can make changes to pretty easily to get these type of things updated. I haven't delved deep enough into it because we're still about 3 months into our implementation. I would like to see some automated workflow come through. So our SIM is on Greylog. I would like to be able to write some rules that basically can go out there and when we could run some queries on a regular basis, and if we see the results are coming in, we could automatically use the rule to kick off an update to the threat matrix. And then we wouldn't need to go and do specific testing. We would actually go, well, if this query fires properly and we get the right result back, we can go and automatically update the matrix. That's the type of thing I would like to do. We haven't got that far with osquery yet, but we're really excited to be able to kind of add this to our matrix and to our tool set and be able to start doing some automated testing with that as well. Because it's easy enough it's a lot easier to go fire off a query and see if it discovered what you're looking for than it is to actually do the manual testing to go in there and test some malware specifically.
Do you have any advice for other organizations that might be looking to scan in-memory processes with Yara rules?
So we're still getting geared up with that too. I would, my recommendation is to be careful a little bit with Yara. Yara is great, and it's really nice to have a full tool set with that. Make sure that your stuff that you're scanning in memory or scanning on the endpoint is really designed for endpoint or memory. We use a lot of Yara rules as a company on attachments, email attachments, to kind of blow those up and take a look and see if there's malicious items in there, as well as network. You don't necessarily want to throw a network Yara rule that will never fire on an endpoint and have it keep sitting there and hitting it, especially when it's always a factor is what kind of utilization you're putting on the endpoint. But I would just say be careful and be as accurate as you're possible, that you're writing Yara rules specifically for that function and only applying them to the endpoint. Same thing, you don't want to apply an endpoint rule to the network either. It's just going to create overhead.
Trying to think how to word this question, but I know you've talked a lot about Yara rule sets. What percentage of your detection mechanisms would you say you're utilizing the FIM EDR rule set for as opposed to Yara?
Probably a lot more now, because we really haven't stepped up the Yara on Uptycs yet. So we're still going through those rules and those firings now. I think we will. We'll probably use them probably 50-50, I would say, when all is said and done. But I don't think Yara is completely 100% where I would just not use those EDR rules anymore.
And did you have a strategy in testing with your AppEng and OpsEng teams in triaging those FIM rule sets to make sure the benefit from security outweighed the possible risk to an application?
Well, it's like I said, it's always. I mean, you always have to look into that, right? We do work with the application teams quite a bit. Normally, when we do almost every product that we do a yearly security testing. We'll go through and we'll measure performance as well during that period of time, because we don't want to drag down systems, and that's gotten us into places where maybe we're using 2 different AVs somewhere in our environment, right? For an example, because one AV solution might work really well on a regular file server, but anything that's doing a lot of processing or night work where it's doing a ton of reads and writes on a constant basis, that's not going to work the same way. So we do a lot of performance testing with our application developers to make sure that when we add something like this, we're not causing a lot of overhead, because they're very sensitive about it. And I understand you have to balance the security risk versus business being able to do business for the most part.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve. That was phenomenal. I think that's.
Thanks.
We're going to take a quick 5-minute break to load up on coffee. I'm good. I'm juiced, but also bathroom break. Just take a step outside if you need to, and we'll resume in 5 minutes, folks. Thank you very much.